Good morning. So, like Shandon said, I'm Jared, and please let me know if I'm not holding the mic right. This is still all very new, but it's very exciting, especially because I get to talk to you this morning about something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's how do I, thanks Mark, how do I live my life in a way that honors God, particularly with reference to my work? So for those of you who don't know, I work as a software developer, and we write stuff for golf, which often feels very far from anything God can use. I mean, it's golf. It's just a fun game. But recently, we did this Fueled series. And so one of the key verses we had there was, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And so what's obvious about that is it means that we're doing something for God. As Steve pointed out in his last video, it means we're honoring God. And so he used this to outline a set of fuel tanks with the goal, which I'm hoping you're all still following, of keeping them all in the healthy zone. What struck me with that is if I'm loving God with all my heart, soul, strength, and mind, I have to do that all the time, right? You can't give everything sometimes. It has to be everything all the time, which means that I need to be able to apply that to my work in some way. And I wasn't quite sure how to do this. And this is something that's gone on often in my life. It's like, how am I living according to God's plan, and how am I working according to his plan? So today I want to just have a look at a few things that I've been thinking about there. I think if we can go to the next slide. And so as we look into the scriptures, we can just take a brief overview of what God says about his work. And we'll see that God created us to work. God has equipped us to work, and we can glorify God through our work. And then just work through some questions about how we might practically apply this. So, where do we begin? Well, I think a good place to start is to look at what does God actually say about work for us. And an excellent place to start with that is to go all the way back to Genesis 1. It's particularly the first verse. And we see that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Then over the next 6 days, God proceeds to create our entire universe and fill it with living creatures. So we're going to skip ahead to the seventh day and continue with, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array. And by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creation that he had done. And so a couple of things we can see just straight away is that God works. This is what he's resting from on the seventh day. But we also get a better picture of what constitutes work. Because what does it say God's work is? His work is creating the heavens and the earth. Now, obviously, we need to see a little bit about what's going on here, because I don't think I'm going to create the heavens or the earth at all. That's definitely not on the agenda. So maybe we say, well, his work is creating something useful. He's creating something valuable. We also see that it's using effort, because he rests afterwards. So it's something different to rest. So maybe we could start with a definition of work that's something like it's putting an effort to make something valuable or do something valuable. And what's interesting with that is it then means it's not just my employment or my vocation that's my work, but work can be anything that I do which I put effort into to create something valuable. So if you're a parent, then looking after your children is work. And I'm sure most of you would agree with that. Often hard work. Okay. But it also means that the charity work we do, or sometimes even things we think of as like a hobby or just something to do along the side, can be work through which God can be glorified. Even the chores that we partake in. Which then raises the question, well, what was God's plan for us, if this is what we see work as being? So we can go back to our passage in Genesis and look at the sixth day when God created mankind. So we go from Genesis 1:27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So what are we seeing here? Oh, firstly, you're created in God's image, which means that you're here on earth to be God's representative. So we're already thinking, well, what does that mean for work? Well, if God created the heavens and the earth, then we're here in some way to continue that work. And we then see in 28 that he gives us two charges. First, to be fruitful and increase in number, which, judging from the number of people who leave at the end of worship every morning, we seem to be doing all right at. And then to rule over the earth, over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky. So it's in some part to continue God's work. And we see this charge repeated again in a parallel verse in the second chapter of Genesis, which says, the Lord took man and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. So this work is something that God's created to be a good thing for us. It's something that we're designed to do as human beings. Now, we then reach the problem that my work often doesn't feel like that. It's really hard, it's exhausting, it can create stress and anxiety, and can distract from God. So we then have to consider the fall. So this is in the third chapter of Genesis, where Adam and Eve are deceived. And through this deception, they eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and sin enters the world, and our relationship with God, or we are separated from God. And part of that separation, God tells us, is it means work is cursed. So it's now by the sweat of your brow and through hard toil that you'll feed yourself. Now, fortunately, God also has a redemption plan, so work is not lost. It can still be part of God's good plan, but it requires us to give it back over to God. And what is also fortunate is God doesn't leave us at this point, because God didn't just create us to work, he also equips us for our work. So we can look at a passage like Ephesians 2:10. We see that we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God had prepared in advance for us to do. So the first amazing thing with that is we are God's handiwork. And that's not like a general humankind was made by God. That's God made each and every one of you. And he didn't just make you, he made you with some purpose in mind. Some thought that, this is Jared, and these are the works that I want him to do. And what's fortunate with that is because God is all-powerful and omniscient, and because he created you, and because he knows what he has planned for you to do, he's created you with the drives and the abilities to achieve this. He hasn't gone, I want Jared to be a basketball player, but let's make him like 3 foot tall with no hand-eye coordination. If he wants you to do it, you have those abilities. And so then we can go out into the world and achieve the works that he set out for us. So one place where we might see this is if we go back to the Old Testament. So now at this point, we're in Exodus, which means that God has started his redemption work. So he's called a people to be his people, and he's led them out of Egypt under the leadership of a man called Moses, who he called for that purpose. But now God's come to Moses and he says, I'm going to dwell among you. You are going to build this tent or the tabernacle, and that's going to be my dwelling place, so that the presence of God is once again amongst his people. Which would terrify me, because how do you build a house that's going to house God? How do you build a place worthy of his? Well, God comes to Moses and he says, this is what it's going to look like. But not only that, he also says that he has raised someone for this job. So we join from Exodus 31:1. And then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom and with understanding, with knowledge and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones and wood, and to engage in all kinds of craft. Moreover, I have appointed Aholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, to help him. Also, I have given ability to all the skilled workers to make everything I have commanded you. Then continues with a list of all the items that are going to need to be created. So again, like we say, we see that Bezalel was called for this purpose, and God had raised him for this purpose and given him all these skills. But what's the most important qualification he has? Right at the top of that list is that God had filled him with the Spirit of God. And it's from this filling of the Spirit that the other gifts have come. But the other gifts are also still from God. So what we see here is that there isn't like a secular spiritual divide. God gives both gifts, and the spiritual gifts flow into the secular gifts, if you want to call them that. And it's not just a once-off. He's done this not just for Bezalel and not just for Oholiab, but for all the skilled workers who would be required. So he's still doing this for us today. And what's the point of that? Why do we need to be filled with these skills? Well, he tells us at the end, it's to make everything I commanded you to. Can you imagine if Moses comes up to Bezalel and goes, I've just got this commandment from God, the one true God. You're going to help me and we're going to build this tabernacle and it's going to be incredible. He's going to dwell in it. And Bezalel goes, I hear you. But business has really picked up at the minute. Like, I have got so many orders. Can we maybe do next year sometime? It's like, that's not honoring God. In the same way, you can read how these same skill sets are used numerous times by the Israelites in latter times to create idols which subvert worship from God. So though you're given the skills, there's still a choice to be made. And that choice is, are we going to work for ourselves or for someone else? Or are we going to glorify God through our work? So this takes us to our third point, which is that God is glorified through our work. So how do we do that? Or we could look at a verse like Matthew 5:16, where it says, in the same way, this is Jesus speaking, in the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to God, your Father, who is in heaven. So we see that as we work out our gifts and our abilities, God is glorified. We're able to reflect God to those around us who are maybe touched by our work or who witness our work. But what exactly does that mean, to let our light shine? Well, Paul gives us a better idea as we read his letter to the Colossians. So we can look at Colossians 3:17. Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God for him. So to let our light shine, that means to dedicate everything to God, but also to recognize that it's God who's given us the ability to do these things. And now Paul continues to express this point in specific circumstances. So how should fathers relate to their children? And we're going to jump to verse 22, where it instructs a sort of employment situation, where he says, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it, not only when their eye is on you and to curry favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving, and anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs. There is no favoritism. Masters, you must provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know you also have a master in heaven. Now, maybe one thing just to address, like straight off as a little footnote, is this use of slaves in the Bible. And this is not a talk on that, and this passage definitely doesn't condone slavery. That's one thing to note. Paul's talking to specific people in a specific time and place in the Roman world, and so he can't ignore the fact that many of the people who would have been hearing this letter would have been slaves. And so the idea is not, is this right or wrong? It's given where you are, how should you live your life to glorify God? So maybe a way to understand this for today is we could say that as a slave, you're an employee who has no rights, who has no freedom, who has no job satisfaction, and is not being paid well. So even the sort of lowliest employee, or the person who's struggling the most, you can still glorify God through your work, and God still has an expectation for how you work. And what is this expectation? We're to work with a sincere heart. We're to use all the talents and the abilities God has given us in the best way we can. And what's amazingly freeing about this for me is it means that I'm no longer working for myself, I'm working for God. I find I really enjoy the work I do, and I'm sure, or hopefully a lot of you do as well. But one of the traps that often brings is it means you can find an intense amount of validation from the work you're doing. When things are going well, you feel amazing. Like you're delivering projects on time, people are stoked with the work you're doing. Oh, it's just fantastic. But the flip side of that then becomes true as well. It means when things aren't going well, when deadlines start to be missed, when projects fail or work just disappears, or you're struggling even to find work, well then how do you cope with that? It's a bit like Jesus' parable of the house built on the sand versus on the rock. So you can choose here, am I going to build my identity into my employment and try and find it there? And that's a bit like building a house on the sand, because there's always circumstances beyond our control which can just rip it out from under us. I think back to my father-in-law, who was an incredible man, and he was an incredibly skilled engineer who had managed to get himself very high in a company through diligent work and delivering projects well. But then the global sort of situation shifted and local policies changed, and suddenly the type of work he was doing was no longer viable within South Africa. And that led to this firm having to shut down his department, and he got retrenched. And I think that almost broke him. But suddenly this thing that he'd poured so much of his life into and found so much validation in was just gone. And now you have to restart from that. And it's not to say that when you find your identity in Christ, it's not hard to face these storms. If we go back to our house analogy, the windows still shake, and there might be a roof tile or two that comes off. But because the foundation is sure, you're still working for God, and He still loves you, and He still created you for a purpose. So you're so much better able to weather those storms. The other amazing thing about working for the Lord is it means that you're not working for human masters. And I've been fortunate always to have really good managers. And this is one of the dangers about this camera and it going on YouTube, is there's a very, very tiny chance that they could see this one day. So if they do, hi David, thank you. But they're still human. Whereas to work for God is to work for a perfect manager who's always just and is always faithful. And He's never going to shortchange you or make you feel like your work is not noticed. He can also offer you something that no earthly manager can, which we see from this passage is an eternal reward. So when we work for a manager here, you might get a salary, you might get some sort of congratulations and good feelings from it and a sense of achievement, but those do fade. And as we see from Jesus, any treasures we store on earth are liable to theft or mold or just to disappear. Whereas this eternal reward which Christ is offering us, it can never be taken away, and also eternity, it lasts forever. Also allows us to transform the way that we work, because it means that my work is now no longer an end in and of itself. It now becomes a means to an end. The work is just one of the other ways that I'm able to express worship to God as I walk out in His plans for me and use the abilities He has given us to do the work He has given us. So there's now the real challenge, which is how do you provide any practical advice of how to do this? Because we all have such different work. I'm sure there are things that you guys will consider to be your work, which I can't even think of. Even if we just think of vocations, there are people here from accountants to zoologists who are doing work that I can't understand. I also have not been working for that long. There also will be people here who have been working at least as long as I've been alive. So maybe what we can try and do instead is consider some questions which might help you to work out how to work for God. So the first thing I often think of is, what work am I doing? Does it align with God's kingdom? Because there might be cases where the work you're doing can't. It's also possible that you'd have multiple works. You might have a vocation. You might also be a parent. And so do the things that you think of as your work align with the abilities and skills God has given you? And are they able to advance His kingdom? So one of the things here which might happen is that it could not. So I often think about a professor I had when I was studying. And she started out her career working at a company that would host websites. So the way that works, if you're unfamiliar, is you've got a server somewhere. It's just a computer. Connect it up to some networking, and that means anyone in the world can then visit this website. And your job is just to keep the server running and keep it connected to the network. You've got no control over what people put on that website. That's a sort of black box that you're not allowed to touch. And to her horror, they discovered that a large portion of what was running on their servers was serving adult content. And so now this created a dilemma. There were two of them on this team, both devout Christians. And for the other guy, he found he couldn't work here anymore. This was just serving the wrong purpose, and so he left. But for her, she prayerfully considered this for a long time, but came to the conclusion that although there's stuff on this server that's really against God, There are also churches hosting their websites on the same server, and there are organizations which are doing incredible good. And God had put her in this place where she felt that she could continue to work there. Which is just to say that often these things aren't clear. Only you know what your abilities are and what God's called you to. And it's only through prayerfully considering that you can work out exactly where you need to be. You can't look at the guy next to you and be like, oh, well, he does the same thing as me. He's here. That's fine. It's really personal to you. As we said earlier, God personally created you to be someone specific and for specific works. Another question to consider is, why are you doing it? Because even if we've got the right what, we're doing the right works, are we doing it for ourselves or are we doing it for God? Because they can be really close together. It can also not always be the same all the time. There might be certain times where you're called to do one particular area of work and other times where it's another. So I'm just going to play a quick video now, but this came out of one of Tim Keller's sermons. He talks about this man called Eric Liddell. So if you're familiar with Chariots of Fire, that's the movie made about his story. And if you're not, he's an athlete who trained up for the 400 meters at the Olympics in 1924. But part of his story is he was also called to be a missionary, I guess. Yeah, missionary is the right word, in China. So this creates a certain conflict. And this is the clip we're going to see, is his sister confronts him, but she feels he's neglecting his ministry work. That's obviously what God has called him to, because he's spending so much time fixating on his running. So can we just play that clip quick?
I believe that God made me for a purpose, for China. But he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. To give it up would be to hold him in contempt. You were right. It's not just fun. To win is to honor him.
And so we see that what Eric Liddell is able to do incredibly well is he's able to recognize what God has called him to. He's able to use this to glorify God. If you're not familiar with the story, what he's also done, as I said, he's a 400-meter runner. That's the gold medal he eventually wins. His speciality is actually the steeplechase, which is also running, but it's quite a different discipline. I could do steeplechase a little bit. I can't run 400 meters. But they'd placed the steeplechase on a Sunday in that Olympics. So he'd chosen to change his discipline to honor God because he believed in keeping the Sabbath on the Sunday. One of the other interesting things he shows us, though, is that he's called to multiple things. But you can also maybe be put in a specific place for a specific time to learn things that God's going to use later on. So you might think of someone like David, who grew up as a shepherd. And what does he say when he eventually faces off with Goliath? Because now Saul's come to him and be like, sure, you want to take this guy on? I'm not sure that's the best plan. Sort of tries to talk him down a little bit. But David responds in 1 Samuel 17, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep, and the Lord rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, and he will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. You see how David has such confidence in what God can do for him and through him, because he's lived it before. He was in a place where he had to learn to trust in God, and he was able to learn those lessons so that when God put him in front of a really big challenge, and he felt that he was called to take on this challenge, he was able to stand in faith that God would see him through, because of the smaller things that happen along the way. So it might be a question worth wondering is, even if you can't see exactly what God's doing, but you feel he has put you there, it's worth working at it with all your heart, because you don't know what aspects or what lessons that you're learning now he might use in the future. So the last question that's worth thinking about is, how am I doing it? Because if the what's right and the why is right, we can still fail on the how. Are you being a good witness to God and bringing him glory? Is it really reflecting and evident to the people around me that I'm working for God? One of the ones that gets me often is, am I honoring God with everything I do? Where I feel particularly challenged with this is because of the nature of the work I do, we do these deployments. So kind of what that looks like is you release new software out into the wild. And because of the way it's set up, it means that at some point you have one button click to press. And when you click it, everything goes live. And in that moment, you know whether you've added a new feature and people are going to be really excited about it, or if you've brought the system down, in which case people get very angry very fast, and you hope that your manager calls you, because the alternative is the CEO calls you, and that's real stress. So when I'm sitting there and you've done all your prep and you're about to press that button, I'll often pray. And it'll be something like, thank you for these opportunities. Just thank you that I'm able to work here and do this. Please, Lord, will you remind me of anything I've forgotten to do? And will you give me the wisdom and understanding to solve any problems that occur once we've deployed this? And then you press the button and you wait. And hopefully nothing happens. And then you go and do some testing and it all works. And this is the point where I often feel I fail, is that I'll then continue on with my day and I'll send the messages off to the guys to be like, deployment's out, all good, give myself a little pat on the back and off you go. But what I failed there is to acknowledge that the only reason that I was able to do anything successful there is because of these abilities that God has given me and because of his grace. And so as we acknowledge God as the source of our talents and abilities, and we use them as God intended, it means that our work can become this act of worship. We're able to reflect his goodness and shine his lights in the world and honor his name. So I just invite you, as we sort of close out for today, to consider, what is the work that God has called you to do? Why are you doing it? And how are you doing it? So then tomorrow when we head into work, or maybe when you go home and you're looking after your children, or you just doing things around the house, can remember that this can also be worship for God.